Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very informative show coming right up with special guest, Eyre, and he's here today to share with us his new book, Death in Mudlick, a coal country fight against the drug companies that delivered the opioid epidemic. Now, Eyre has been a reporter for the Charleston Gazette-Mail since 1998. In 2017, his investigation into massive shipments of opioids to West Virginia's southern coalfields was awarded a Pulitzer Prize. So let's welcome to the show, Eyre.
Well, thanks so much for having me on, Marianne. I really appreciate it.
Oh my goodness, it's such an honor to have you here and to talk about this story. And I have to ask, what even got this on your radar? Because my goodness, I think, when this was all happening, I don't think anyone knew what was going on.
I came at it in a really strange fashion. I actually wasn't the health reporter. I wasn't the opioid reporter. I was actually working in the basement of the Capitol, state Capitol, and we had gotten a tip that the Attorney General had an inaugural party that was paid for by a bunch of corporations, and we went through and first off, it was kind of strange for the Attorney General to have an inaugural party. Governors had them, that sort of thing. But we got the list of the people that paid for the inaugural party, and you had your typical ones like, the Coal Association, the Natural Gas Association, some of the bigger companies in the state. But then I hit on one called Cardinal Health that I never had heard of, and I did a little bit of digging and found out that they were a company that distributes drugs. They're called wholesale distributors. They take drugs from the factories and ship them to pharmacies and hospitals. And I did a little more digging and found out that the Attorney General's wife was the lead lobbyist in Washington, D.C. for this company, and that he had also lobbied for that company. And to make matters worse, there was currently a pending suit that had been filed by his predecessor, the one who he beat in the election back in 2012. And one of the names of the companies that was filed, that the Democratic AG that lost the election to this new Republican AG, was Cardinal Health. They were part of a lawsuit that the state had filed against a bunch of distributors. So it all kind of slowly snowballed from there, but it really started through a back channel way. And then I basically spent after that, I've spent the next 7 years reporting on the opioid epidemic.
Well, I'm so grateful, and I'm sure many other people are as well, because, you really uncovered something that the public needs to know about. And I was shocked when I was hearing, just some of the tactics that the drug companies were using to get doctors to go ahead and prescribe opiates.
Yeah, you had, first off, you had Purdue Pharma that had a huge dishonest marketing campaign where they were looking at prescribers. They were going to their offices. They were sending them, the doctors, to faraway conferences at exclusive resorts, trying to entice them to sell OxyContin. So you had that going on. And then part and parcel with all that, you had unscrupulous doctors who would just write a prescription for anything, provided that you paid in cash. They worked out of places called pill mills, where people would line up around the block, several blocks. You had unscrupulous pharmacists who would fill any prescription, provided it was paid in cash. And then you had these distributors like Cardinal Health that were just flooding the state with prescription opioids, millions and millions of pills, of doses of OxyContin and hydrocodone, which is like Lortab, and Norco are some of the brand names of hydrocodone. So you just had these massive amounts, and in our state, most of them were going to mom and pop pharmacies and these little out of the way places. The one that I focus mostly on in the book is a place called Save Right Pharmacy, which is really smack dab in the middle of nowhere. It's the only pharmacy in a town of just over about 380 people. It's just a little coal town. It's got 2 railroad tracks that go right through the middle. The coal trains zip through, they don't stop. And this was a town that over 2 years, these drug distributors shipped nearly 9 million prescription opioids pills in just 2 years. And there's no possible way that any way, form, or fashion that a town like that could have been using that many pills for, on a per person basis. But we found out that they were basically servicing not only the border states like Maryland, Kentucky, Ohio, but people were coming as far away as Florida to this one little pharmacy in the middle of nowhere in southern West Virginia, down in the coal fields.
Oh my goodness. I mean, that is just insane. I mean, how did you even get a hold of what those numbers were? Because I mean, that's just absolutely crazy that these people are traveling such distance from other states to get this filled.
Yeah, it wasn't easy. We went up, just to give you, it was basically, there was a lawyer, a tenacious lawyer, and there was a woman named Debbie Priest who kind of started this all, raising the issue about the doctors and the pharmacists and then the distributors. But what we actually had a lengthy court battle with the distributors. And when I say we, our newspaper, we had a lawyer who worked pro bono or at no charge to the newspaper. He was a professor at West Virginia University, named Pat McGinley. And we had to go to court to unseal records that would eventually lead us to the exact numbers. But they had filed, the companies had filed under seal complaints and information about the number of pills that they were distributing to these small towns. And we filed a motion to intervene. And we were fortunate enough, we hired a local lawyer who was worked across the street from the courthouse in this tiny county called Boone County. And he connected with the judge, and the judge ultimately unsealed the records. And then from there, we got, that led us to some DEA data that we got through a public records request. And then we just saw, these massive amounts, this saturation of southern West Virginia of opioids. And in the same counties that had the largest number of pills distributed, they also were the counties that had the largest number of overdoses. And those counties that had such large number of overdoses, I looked it up on, there's a CDC site that you can, kind of like now you can see coronavirus per person, but you could see overdose death per person in each county. And probably, I think 10 of the top 13 counties in the U.S. that had excessive numbers of overdose deaths, the highest rates of overdose, were in southern West Virginia. So it's a clear connection between the massive amounts of pills that were being distributed there and the number of people who were dying.
It's heartbreaking to hear this. I'm so glad you uncovered this, though, because it's like here we have this modern day, drug lord operating in the US, and it's not just one person, it's like layers of people who are involved in this and benefiting from this.
Yeah, a lot of people have described it as a, quote, legal cartel. And I think in the book I write that, between the lobbyists that were lobbying for these drug companies and the unscrupulous doctors and the pharmacists who, weren't upholding their duty to, distribute drugs, they knew that they had connections with these pill mills. So they had the pill mill clinics and the pill mill doctors and the pill mill pharmacists. So you had the system, and then the checks and balances weren't there. You had the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, that was supposed to be monitoring all this. But in fact, they had their heads in the sand. And at the height of the opioid epidemic in West Virginia, they had one investigator for the diversion of drugs, just one. Now they have like 15. And of course, the drug problem has shifted to heroin and meth and other things. But they had one prescription one guy looking at the diversion of prescription drugs. And as I write in the book, it's almost as if like it's this whole system, this whole interlocking system had been set up by Pablo Escobar or El Chapo, the drug lords. And there were people who actually state police testified that this was really not much different than a legal cartel. The only difference between it was, they weren't murdering people with guns and that sort of thing. But it was very similar to the cartels that you read about in Mexico and South America.
Yeah, and even the doctors, there were many good doctors that didn't want to prescribe this medication, and they were in a way threatened, which I was like floored when I heard that.
Yeah, you had, and I've talked to some doctors now that regret what happened, and they said, you had even the, Purdue Pharma had so many sales reps here, and they knew what they were doing, and they worked, these doctors, and you had, really well-meaning doctors who were just, under threat. If they didn't prescribe OxyContin or painkillers, that they were, you know, not doing their duty. They were shortchanging the patient. There just was this push from the highest places. I know that the West Virginia Board of Medicine here rewrote their laws to say, pain is the fifth vital sign and all that. And then, so you just had these prescriptions, this unfettered number of prescriptions. And we also had the highest prescription rate in the nation here in West Virginia at one point. But, they had literally, some of these pain clinics had machines that the doctors weren't even staffed there. They weren't even there. They were just there in name only. They lived miles away, hundreds of miles away. And you'd have places where people would go in, get their temperature checked, their weight, and then get their prescription. That was it. Maybe they said they had a bad back or something, but yeah, it was just an unfettered and just a Wild West system.
Mm. That's really unfortunate. I heard about, you also wrote in your book about how one of the pharmacies was so busy, they would have like popcorn and food for people who are waiting in line to get, their medications. And it was just kind of just hearing how they're, just kind of going for profit more than people, the well-being of people, is just heartbreaking.
Yeah, that was the good one. That was the Save Right Pharmacy. And I've seen, as part of the court records, the undercover videos, and you just see cars backed up almost to the highway. You see the parking lot full. You see people just trading drugs in the parking lot for cash. And like you said, inside they offered hot buttered popcorn as they were literally pitching prescriptions over the counter. They even set up a system where they had two different bags, one color. A white bag meant it was a legitimate prescription, like, because some people have blood pressure medications or things of that nature. And then they had another colored bag for the opioids. So when people left, the people, wouldn't get robbed or whatever. And then to keep the customers happy, at one point, they set up an actual trailer on the parking lot where they started. Now, this wasn't complimentary. You had to buy hot dogs and hamburgers and get Diet Cokes, and it was like a concession stand almost to keep the customers happy. And when the pharmacist was asked about all this in his deposition, he said that basically the reason for these large crowds was because he was offering lower prices and faster service. And well, that doesn't explain why somebody, let's say in North Carolina, where you are, driving to West Virginia, can you imagine how many pharmacies you would have to pass to get here? There'd be literally dozens of pharmacies to get here from there. So it didn't add up. And then at one point he said, he was telling people in town that the reason for the large crowds is because there was this huge influx of tourists to hunt and fish and to ride four-wheelers in the mountains. So that was his explanation. But of course, the real destination was to get your prescription filled with no questions asked, provided you paid in cash.
Sounds like a really weak defense to me.
Yeah.
If you're going to have one. I mean,
well, he went to prison.
Where he should be. Yeah. Because you look at the human toll, and it's like, how many people died because, we have these people that were so entrenched in making money,
Yeah, about it's been averaging about 65,000 nationwide a year, usually about 1,000 in West Virginia at the height. Now it has the overdose death numbers have decreased slightly over the past 2 years. They just released the 2019 data where there has been a decrease, primarily because there's wide accessibility now of the drug Narcan or naloxone, which is the overdose reversing drug. It's really like a miracle drug when somebody passes out of an overdose. You can administer naloxone or Narcan and really bring them back to life really quickly. Now, I say all that positive news with some of the negative news we're hearing now is with COVID-19, there has been quite an uptick. I've heard anything from 11% to 20% increase in overdoses. We don't have real solid data yet. The only thing that I'm going on is I know that between last May, so May 2019 versus this May, there was a doubling of overdoses. And I don't know if they died, but EMTs responding to overdoses. So with all this, anxiety and isolation with and not people not being able to get into treatment programs with COVID-19, I'm really fearful that those gains that we've made over the last 2 years may be swallowed up by the coronavirus epidemic.
Yeah, it's pretty just appalling how that's all coming together because people are trapped and
Exactly.
kind of going back to maybe some behaviors that don't serve them.
Yeah, people unemployed. That's the thing. I know the restaurant industry has been hit particularly hard. A lot of people who are in recovery say that having a job gives them a sense of pride and gives them is motivating. So a lot of those people are unemployed now. I guess since they've opened up, there was a real trouble early on with the group therapy. If you talk to anybody who's been in recovery, they say the group therapy is the number one thing, and they were trying to do a lot of that on Zoom, and that's a good thing, but 25% of West Virginians don't even have access to broadband internet, so they couldn't even do that. And then there's also, I have some other fears too. After we wrote all these stories and all the stuff came out and really exposed these companies and the insidious practices and the doctors, they started doing some regulations and they limited their prescribing authority, so you couldn't, like my book starts off with a coal miner in West Virginia who had upwards of 500, 600 opioids prescribed over, just a couple weeks. And they did away with all that through legislation that you had to limit prescriptions to 7-day supply. Then you had to go back. But now I'm hearing, and the American Medical Association is recommending that we waive all those requirements because people who are in real pain, that have cancer and things of that nature, aren't being able to access their drugs. So I don't want to prevent them from getting the drugs, but this idea that it's wide open again causes me grave concern.
Yeah, I think it should be concerning for everybody, because there's reasons that there were kind of brakes put on that in some ways because it's just so out of control. We have so many people dying from this.
Yeah, you'd run in. I mean, you know, and you run into people that'll tell you. I mean, they go to the dentist and they all of a sudden have like a 40 or 35-day supply of OxyContin, and because they have had a tooth pulled or some sort of dental work, and there's no need for that. I mean, sure, a 7-day supply is sufficient, and then you can do ibuprofen or another painkiller that's not so addictive. But yeah, with the and I don't know which medical boards. I need to check into that to see if they're following these new guidelines or suggestions or recommendations by the American Medical Association. And I don't necessarily think the American Medical Association has bad intentions, but I think the consequences could be very serious.
Yeah, they're probably just not seeing the full picture as it is. And maybe they all need to read your book. That would help, right?
Oh, yes, every one of them.
Well, in your book, you talk about sustained outrage, and I'd love for you to share with our listeners what you mean by that.
Okay, well, that was kind of the rocket fuel behind my entire book that I wrote. It means basically it was a term coined by the late publisher of the Charleston Gazette, a guy named Ned Chilton, and the idea is that we get too distracted, and if you want to correct an injustice, you need sustained outrage, and that means every day or story after story or protest after protest that you're going to hammer away at injustices until they're righted. And it was really, I actually had some sustained outrage T-shirts printed up. I was offering them free with anybody that sent me a copy of their receipt for buying the book way back when. And it's funny. I saw the other day at one of the rallies against police brutality in New York City that there was a guy who had a mask on, good, and he also had a sustained outrage T-shirt on. So I'm not sure who it was, but it's catching on. So it can mean a lot of things. I mean, for me, it was something that I had to put up with a lot of stuff. My job was threatened. The attorney general was trying to hide things and filed an investigation against our paper. On and on and on. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's, so I needed something to keep me motivated, and that was hammering away at injustices and trying to keep sustained outrage going. And that was one of my thoughts with the book, that try to keep the idea of sustained outrage is, part of the equation for righting wrongs and holding public officials accountable.
Well, you are definitely very courageous, because I know you went up against a lot of powerful individuals and companies and corporations, and you just went and kept telling the story regardless what was going on.
Yeah, Marianne, in some respects, everybody says they're courageous, but I didn't even realize until we had a court hearing how big these companies were. I mean, the three companies that we went up against are all in the top 20 in the Fortune 500. One's in the top 10. One had the highest paid CEO in the United States 2 years ago. I was just, I started following the story, and I started going to some court hearings, and there was one down in Boone County. It's this little old courthouse that hadn't been renovated since like 1930. It's kind of like, if you imagine what the courthouse looked like in To Kill a Mockingbird, it was kind of like that. And I show up with the one lawyer from West Virginia University. And we walk in, and then lo and behold, all the benches are full. And I just sat down like in the front. I started listening, and people were like, "Oh, I just got my flight in from New York, and I just got my flight in. I came from Columbus. I came from Philadelphia. There were lawyers there from Philadelphia, and it was this corporate counsel for these giant corporations, and they would send 2 or 3 lawyers to this court hearing." And that was the first time I realized the stakes were so high that they wanted to shield all these, records that would show what they had been doing, the flooding, the absolute flooding of Appalachia with high dosage pain pills that ultimately could kill you if you take too many of them. And, here we are, me, a reporter who has to still do cop shifts on the weekends and, has to do a story a day about whatever I can scrap up. And here we are going against, these lawyers from some of the largest law firms in the country, the white shoe law firms with unlimited resources. But at the end of the day, we kind of stuck with it, propelled by sustained outrage, and we exposed them and uncovered what they were doing to the state and the implications and how their practices, their insidious practices, had really ravaged the state of West Virginia. And actually, eventually, we took the next step and we went to court to get these same kind of numbers after we had in West Virginia. After we won the Pulitzer Prize in 2017, we said, well, now we need to get the numbers for the rest of the country. And sure enough, when we got those numbers, we had to go to court. We lost it. We lost at the district court level, but we won in the appeals court level. It turned out that there was, billions and billions of pills being shipped to many of these small towns across the country, especially eastern Kentucky, Tennessee. There's a coal mining county in Utah that had large numbers, southwestern Virginia. So it really was a national issue. But I think that at the end of the day, it served a great purpose because, prior to a lot of our reporting, everybody was blaming the addict, and there's still people that do that. There's still people that, will say, it's the fault of the addict. But certainly, the way the system had been set up, they didn't have much of a chance to not become addicted.
Yeah, I mean, we can't create addicts and then blame them,
Right.
for being that way. And it seems like there's a very predatorial style that's going on with these small mom and pop pharmacies across the country. So, congratulations on bringing that to light. And of course, congratulations on your Pulitzer Prize. I mean, my goodness, I think you have probably saved, and I've said this before, but I personally believe that you've probably saved thousands of lives bringing this to light.
Well, that's kind of you to say. I certainly didn't do it alone. There's a woman who I profile in the book named Debbie Priest, whose brother had died of an OxyContin overdose, and she was instrumental. And her case is really a story of redemption because back in the late 80s, she was actually arrested for being part of the largest drug ring in Appalachia. Many of her family members went to prison. She went to prison, and she came out. Her name's Debbie Priest, and she came out, and she, made an effort that she was going to change her life, turn her life around. And she's the one that started this. She sued a doctor and a pharmacist. Then she says she gathered 30 other people together to sue other doctors and pharmacists. And then she actually, with the help of her lawyer, Jim Cagle, she decided that she was going to figure out where all these drugs were coming from because nobody knew. I mean, we thought maybe it was like FedEx or UPS that was dumping all these drugs or maybe the manufacturers were, Purdue Pharma was shipping all the drugs, but she wound up going to a pharmacy and following one of these delivery trucks, which was in some sort of repurposed ambulance. And she had it didn't say the company on the side, but she had the lone police officer in the town of Kermit, West Virginia, trace the plate, and it traced back to this Cardinal Health. But so it was her. It was Jim Cagle, this lawyer from Georgia. He was tenacious. He never backed down. He was put under tremendous stress by the new attorney general, wanted to fire him, and he was able to fend off being fired. So him and the other lawyers that helped out, it was really a small community banding together to to take on some of the biggest drug giants in the world and expose and their lies and their secrets. And it was really a matter of overcoming, in hindsight, monumental odds. We really had, I mean, to think about it, we really had no business, taking on these companies. We were outmanned, we were out resourced, but we all sort of banded together and exposed what they were doing to the world.
I'm so grateful that you did, and I'm sure so many people are as well. Are you working on anything new? Because, I mean, after this book, you probably wanted to take a break, right?
Oh, yeah, but there's more coming out. So where it stands now, they have these, like, from this one case in Kermit, there's been this that has spawned literally 3,000 lawsuits that are tied up or combined in federal court in Cleveland, and every day different things come out. The latest was one of these drug companies was sharing or distributing an email among their executives that was a parody song about hillbillies. They called them pillbillies, who were going to Florida to get their OxyContin, and the lyrics to the song say it should be sung to the Beverly Hillbillies song. So my takeaway from that was that these companies really were almost mocking us behind our backs, while they were making billions of dollars. They were laughing at us, which is really disgusting to think about. But I expect there'll be more out, and then there'll probably be a global settlement. They've talked. The offer lately was $18 billion. They were going to offer $18 billion, but the problem with that is, first off, the lawyers get a third of the money, and then the rest of the money, you would think would go to drug treatment. But the way things are stipulated now, that the cities and counties and states that are suing these drug distributors, that they could use the money in any way they wanted to. So, if Kermit, which has been devastated by the opioid crisis, and there's no treatment centers in the entire county, if they wanted to, they could, buy a trash truck or, hire a second policeman or, anything they want, anything the city wanted to do. So I'm concerned that it won't go to treatment, because one thing with opioid use disorder, it takes, to really be successful, everybody I've talked to, it takes about 3 to 5 years of intensive therapy before you before you can stop using, and there's quite a few success stories. It's not all negative. I mean, there's certainly plenty of people that have gotten off opioids, but I don't know, if they don't have more treatment facilities, we're going to still be in a world of hurt for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, we need to be able to give them some help, and to add it to a city or county or state slush fund isn't really kind of helping, you know?
I know, but I've seen it happen before. We had a $30 million settlement here with some of the drug distributors, and the attorney general peeled off a bunch for his consumer protection division. I just don't have a lot of confidence that it's going to go especially to the long-term treatment facilities. Even and after our when we got our money, the money that went to the settlement money that went to treatment was primarily in the for facilities in the northern part of the state, where the problem was not as great as it was in the southern part of the state. So it didn't even, within our own state, it didn't even go to the region that had suffered the most.
It's just amazing. Well, I am so grateful, Eric, that you have written this book and you have the courage and tenacity that you do to show up and be there for basically for humanity, because otherwise it's like, who else is reporting on this? And the way that you've done it is in a way that people can really understand it. I think a lot of times when people think of, companies going and putting drugs out there for everybody, at such great quantities, they probably think, oh, that happened in the 80s. They don't really understand it's happening right now.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your comments too. And, at the end of the day, I kind of wrote the book. What inspired me to write the book was to, show that even if you're in a small place, even people in small places can make a big difference. Sometimes the underdog can win, and I say that sometimes. But there's sometimes you can overcome monumental odds. But at the end of the day, this was a small community. We didn't have anybody coming in from New York to save Appalachia. We didn't have anybody coming in from Washington, D.C. To write this book. We did it all here, and Appalachia always gets a bad rap, but in this case, there was a number of individuals who really got together, banded together, stuck it out, practiced sustained outrage, and ultimately, exposed this issue, or uncovered, what was literally massive pill dumping, and kind of changed the trajectory of the whole opioid epidemic. As I mentioned, the last 2 years, we've had a decline in overdose deaths, although, again, with the caveat that I'm concerned about what COVID-19's effects is. And unfortunately, they're so far behind on reporting the opioid deaths. They're about 6 months behind. So we're really not going to know the true impact of COVID-19 for probably till January.
Wow.
Although there could be another surge, so it's all up in the air, just like everything else right now.
Oh my goodness. My goodness, Eric, you are such an inspiration. Where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your book, Death in Mudlick, and be part of your community?
I have a website. I think it's hard to find, but it's ericeyre.book.com, ERICEYRE book.com. On my Twitter, it's just at Eric Eyre. I've been getting a lot of emails from readers. I guess they go online and something can find my email address, but it's Eric William Eyre, ERIC William EYRE @gmail.com.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, I really appreciate your interest, Marianne, and thank you for all that you do.
Well, thank you, Eric. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Death in Mudlick. Death in Mudlick is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, it's available in Kindle. If you'd like to connect with Eric, you can at ericeyresbook.com for more information. And that is spelled ERICEYRE book.com. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.